Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's discussion. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This conversation is being recorded, be sent to you to your email following the event. If you have any questions during today's chat, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A tool below. I'll be fielding the questions at the conclusion of today's presentation. And also, to keep things lively, we'll be asking a few polling questions during our discussion, so look out for those. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jeff LaRock, Director of Capital Markets here at NASDAQ, and I'll be your moderator today. Currently, I co-head the healthcare advisory team here at NASDAQ, helping our publicly traded companies develop their investor relations efforts, along with providing them some color behind its stock, industry flows, items like that. Since joining NASDAQ in 2008, I've seen hundreds of companies go public, raise capital along the way, and ultimately become industry bellwethers. Witnessing our clients' growth and maturing has really been one of the most gratifying parts since joining. Today, we're lucky enough to have some highly regarded industry experts on our panel. Dr. Patrick Smith, Dr. Fran Brown, and Dr. Tina Morris have all joined us today for today's discussion. Thank you all for joining us, lending your expertise. So before we get started, let's do some introductions. First, I'll start with Dr. Patrick Smith, President of Integrated Drug Development at Certara. Patrick, would you introduce yourself?
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Patrick Smith, and as stated, I serve as President of Integrated Drug Development Consulting at Certara. We have the pleasure to work with a large number of early-stage biotech companies who are looking to optimize their development programs and navigate clinical and regulatory pathways towards success. I'm a clinical pharmacologist by training and background, and my career has spanned academia, big pharma. For the last 10 years, I've been on the consulting side, including founding a company and working directly with many biotech clients in this area. So it's nice to be here.
Thanks, Patrick. Also, we have Dr. Fran Brown, Senior Vice President of Drug Development Science at Certara. Fran, a few things to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jeff. Also great to be here. So my name's Fran Brown. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Drug Development Science Group, which is part of Integrated Drug Development at Certara. Like Patrick, I started life as a clinical pharmacologist and have now been in pharmaceutical development for almost 30 years. The vast majority of that has been in drug development strategy. I've worked at big pharma, smaller biotechs, and for the last 10 years as a consultant drug development strategist to mostly small biotechs. I also work on the sort of flip side of drug development strategy, which is sort of the supporting companies who are looking at potential assets to either fund or acquire as part of the due diligence process. And it's great to be here today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Appreciate it, Fran. And last and certainly not least, Dr. Tina Morris, Executive Director of American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here today. As you mentioned, I'm currently the Executive Director of the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists, an individual member-based organization representing over 7,000 members in the pharmaceutical science and biotechnology space. I started my career life as a virologist, spent some time in academia, but then came into the biotech industry first in a startup environment with a mass spectrometry startup, and then worked for human genome sciences in drug development, crossed over into the regulatory compendial space, worked at the United States Pharmacopoeia for 15 years as the head of global biologics, and then the Senior Vice President of Compendial Science, where I had a lot of exposure to especially biologics, I would say, of all ages, from very, very new modalities to legacy products and biosimilars. crossed over into the association space a few years ago when I was the head of scientific and regulatory affairs at the Parenteral Drug Association, and have now been with AAPS for 2 years. My core expertise is in analytical development and CMC, so chemistry control and manufacturing. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it, Tina. We certainly have a group of highly regarded industry experts, so we're excited to kind of get things going. The past 2 years, biotech has experienced some peak venture funding and an incredible amount of IPOs. And we've certainly seen that here at NASDAQ. So in comparison, the biotech sector is now facing a slowdown, along with some broader market contractions in funding. Capital raises are the lifeblood of biotechs. And if companies, see a delay of bringing, see some delays with bringing in capital, it also, affects the R&D efforts in jeopardy and potentially the success of drugs and treatments moving forward. There's still funding available for biotechs, but investors are proceeding cautiously. Biotech companies, researchers, scientists, business leaders, it's critical for them to reassess, understand the options, and make appropriate adjustments to achieve that next value inflection. We thought it was a great time to get a perspective from Certara on the landscape and how they prepare for this unique and evolving environment. First question, we'll kind of get things going. This one's going to go to Tina, helping us understand the evolving and funding landscape. Tina, can you share what's going on within the biotech funding landscape?
Yes, I'll be happy to get the conversation started here. And again, giving this from a perspective of the scientist observer who's sort of been watching this landscape for a while. And I think what is important here, as you already started to say, there is still a lot of funding out there. There's certainly a bit more volatility, but I think what is going to be important for innovators and folks working in this space is to really have a long view and to look very, very carefully at where their own development projects are going. And I think that's going to be part of our conversation today, that drug development is it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And it's very important to make smart choices along the way. I look at these graphs here and I see them overall going up. I think when we compare to previous years and certainly, where the market has come from overall in a longer time frame, there's a lot more money out there than there ever used to be. I think it would be foolish not to say that the past 2 years and the pandemic has not had an impact. But I think working and developing in a very technology-driven industry also means that this industry adapts very, very quickly. I think we have seen this in the last couple of years, how quickly therapies have come to market, how the different players who are all necessary in this space, from innovators to suppliers to CMOs, CDMOs, have pivoted very, very quickly to bring life-saving therapies to market. This is, I would say, a testament to the agility of this area and the underpinning science. So I overall, I would say I still have a very positive and optimistic view of this.
Thanks, Tina. Kind of to the next question, considering the current landscape, are there certain areas, and this question is to Patrick, are there certain areas where investors are more interested in learning more about, getting more details? Patrick?
Yep. So thanks, Jeff. I think certainly a lot of the same themes apply, and maybe with a heightened sense of awareness or focus around those things. So there's certainly lots of opportunities for quality companies, right, with differentiated products that importantly will bring value to patients. And that emphasis, I think, is higher now than it's ever been around quality of science, quality of the management team of a company is super important. And the quality of the data that backs up the potential of having a differentiated product. So if one has a very solid scientific rationale and robust data to demonstrate that the pharmacology, the target of interest is producing the desired effect, there will definitely be opportunities. I think we are seeing an emphasis on drugs that are closer to the clinic or in the clinic, those that are likely to be first or best in class. And there's also an ongoing interest in platform companies that may be based around a specific treatment modality, a delivery mechanism, or therapeutic area. And these can be really attractive because it gives someone the opportunity to have multiple shots on goal. But it is important to realize that a platform is only really valuable if it can deliver valuable products. So getting that first product into trials, into development is really important. The numbers would indicate that we're continuing to see investments in areas including oncology and immuno-oncology, rare disease, neurology, and infectious disease, which is in a large part driven by what has happened, what continues around development for COVID products. And in platform areas, this includes cell and gene therapy, other biologics, precision medicine seems to be growing, right? And this is where we have a drug targeted at a particular genetic mutation, possibly, combined with a companion diagnostic. So you have a much higher likelihood that you're picking the right patients who are likely to respond to this drug and not using the drug on patients who are less likely to respond. And then there's, continued interest in applications of artificial intelligence, machine learning, particularly as it applies to the drug discovery area.
Patrick, yeah, you make some great points there about certain indications, certain treatments that are I guess you could say are the catchy phrases out there. But yes, you make some great points. This brings us to our first poll question, and this is for the audience, and it's a rather interesting one, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results. Considering the dynamics investors are digesting currently, we'd like to know, where is the next value inflection point when it comes to investing? And you feel free to select as many as apply to you. And the second part is, where is your top priority when it comes to evaluating your investment? I think we'll discuss that one a little bit later. Okay, it looks like we have all the results at this point. Interesting results. Start of preclinical. I actually, I was considering the current environment, and I actually thought that, from a trader's or investor perspective, I would have thought that would have been more of a risk-on type trade, is a term you hear amongst investors. And I would have thought that there have been a little bit more bias to the, closer towards regulatory approval. So, I find these results slightly interesting, certainly interesting, and kind of caught me off guard. Panel, you guys, contributions here, thoughts?
I think from my point of view, this spectrum is probably as I expected, especially looking at sort of the biotech and venture capital end. The majority of the companies we work with at that stage are either sort of gearing up to go into human for the first time, or in phase 1 and phase 2 development.
Tina, any observations here?
I would contribute that based on some of the science that we are seeing presented at our meetings and some of the hot topics that are being discussed and the questions being asked from a technology point of view, I would second what Fran is seeing, because we're seeing that in the scientific discussion and the questions that arise around supporting technologies in sort of what are the technical and scientific hot button issues. Those align, I think, a lot of these align with the earlier stages of development rather than later when the products or the technology or the platform are more mature. So I think we are seeing a very, very healthy discussion, a scientific discussion around those phases of development as well in our meetings and in our workshops.
Patrick, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think, well, the numbers add up to more than 100%, which is interesting. But beyond that, you know, I think one of the trends that we've seen over the last few years is more small companies being able to take things all the way to approval, right? And so I might have expected a little bit more in the later development phases, you know, especially with the changes in the regulatory environments and around the ability to run rare disease programs, oncology programs with relatively small patient populations, right? Makes it attractive and financially feasible for these smaller companies to take things all the way through to the end.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate everybody voting there. You know, moving on to the next area. You know, now that we have a better understanding of the current landscape and when it comes to funding, you know, I'd like to kind of bring up the discussion on what companies are doing in their drug program to position themselves for success. First question is to Fran. What are the critical areas that biotech needs to pay special attention to, you know, for that successful results?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, you know, the areas are not, you know, specific for this funding environment. They're things that are always important for drug development, especially for small companies at the early phases. But I think in the, you know, in the environment of the sort of volatility around funding, I think some of these become especially important. And it's more about how do you make sure that you are being proactive rather than reactive to the current environment. And they focus in 3 real areas. One is to take a look back at your original product development strategy and really have a critical look at it. Are you still heading in the right direction? Is the goal that you want to get to the same as it was before? Looking at the changes in the environment and what's happening, is there a better place to aim for? And make sure that, you know, you're sure that this is the best avenue for your compound to go through or your company to go through. And then having done that, what is it that you need to prove to make sure that you're on that right path and that you're providing the right data at the right time throughout your development program? And really, once you set those 2 parameters, then the next one is making sure that you're spending the money that you've got and the funding you've got to give you the best bang for the buck on the data and the decision making that you need to make along that that sort of route and development route. And I think all of these sort of fit together. They keep you on the right path and they make sure that you're moving in the right direction. And hopefully it will also mean that when things start to get difficult, you've got the optimal package of data to make sure that you can attract funding or divestment or whatever your exit point looks like.
Perfect. Wanted to, and this is on to the next item, and this is a follow-up question to Fran. When it comes to reassessing your strategy, you know, what role does target product profile play in the pharmaceutical development, and how can we reassess this to help biotech moving forward?
Yeah, so your target product profile is really the holy grail. It's the compass that you are using to guide what you do and where you want to be and what you want the product to look like at the end. And if you have a good target product profile, it does two things. It sets the minimum attributes for your product that are required for it to have a chance at commercial success. But it also reflects an upside potential of how much that commercial success could be greater if different attributes of the product turned out differently. So it really gives you a benchmark to set against your decision making as you go through development. And making sure that you have a TPP that does both of these really helps in understanding exactly what you want your clinical trials or your drug development program to achieve as you go from stage to stage through the development pathway.
Perfect, thank you. This next question is to Tina. Why is it important to think about CMC or manufacturability in early development?
I would say because it's a typical it's typical that in early development, the mechanism of action and the part of the TPP that is really focused on how does the drug or the modality work is very much in focus. And the inflection towards manufacturability, quality, and sometimes also regulatory approval happens in some cases too late, and you can make very costly mistakes. I think everybody knows how expensive clinical development is, but having to go back and finding yourself in a position where you are relatively late in clinical development, and then you have a quality or a manufacturing problem that you have to go back and solve can be a deal breaker. And it can be a deal breaker or it can be a difficulty in different ways. We have regulatory pathways up here as a point that comes into play at that juncture as well, depending on whether you are your particular product is a new modality where perhaps there's a lot more, I would say, case by case and negotiation with the regulator at different stages. That also includes how you your manufacturing quality parts of the equation and can get quite involved. If you're working on a modality or a drug where there's an established and well-known regulatory pathway, automatically your CMC considerations, quality considerations are much, much more straightforward. But since we're talking about innovation here, and we're talking, there's a lot of new modalities, a lot of new approaches in the market or in development that the regulator may not even be ready for. And so the regulator is navigating that path with you. And I think this is something to be ready for, to be from all aspects of the TPP, including the quality and the manufacturing aspects.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Tina. And this next question is for Patrick. When considering what investors are looking for and maybe what is going to move the needle, what are the factors that you consider when fleshing out your data strategy?
Oh, let's first recognize that data itself is actually a primary asset, which a biotech is looking to present to its key stakeholders, right? So in order to do this effectively, and there's a data management component of this, it includes the ability to access and retain data in an organized and compliant manner, but also includes the ability to leverage that data to demonstrate value. And it can be really hard to take advantage of these opportunities if all your data is sitting in unorganized Excel spreadsheets, right? So these days, there's lots of exciting opportunities to leverage data to add value, right? Which includes merging your data with different data sources, which may range from non-clinical and clinical data collected through the program. But it also means leveraging data from other sources like omics data, data from other trials, other programs, published data, and real world data sets, which could include electronic health records, or using digital sources. So to do this well and take advantage of this, you need a roadmap and a strategy in advance, because it takes time, right, to be able to understand and know what data might be available, how that data might be leveraged, and where one can curate it from, right? So one can use aggregated sources to, as Fran mentioned, to use to build a more robust target product profile, to benchmark a new compound against the standard of care, or against other emerging competitors, to better profile potential patient populations for clinical trial design, and even the use of real-world data as a control arm for a clinical trial. So all of these applications can be used to facilitate and speed development and reduce costs, and make a more compelling argument to stakeholders regarding the competitiveness and differentiation of a compound. So we see things like the use of modeling and simulation, or what we call pharmacometrics, to optimize doses. It allows one to do clinical trial simulation, which has really become an established approach to doing more efficient and effective trials, and in some cases avoids the need for certain trials altogether. And when you take such a quantitative approach, it changes the way that one does development. So the types of information that is collected in trials differs, because you're needing to make sure that you're collecting the right data to inform these predictive models, so that they're available and developed when you'll need them for later. So overall, one needs to think this through in advance and come up with a roadmap around what data sources are available and how can I use that to my advantage, trying to prove various points to relevant stakeholders.
Thank you, Patrick. And last question on this slide, and in the current environment and considering any potential downside risks, potentially, protecting yourself in that, why is it important to think what could potentially go wrong? That question is to Fran. Fran, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I know it's another great question. I think scientists, drug developers, by nature, we're optimistic. I think you have to be to work in an industry where a development plan that's 8 to 10 years long is looking optimistic. But it is important to recognize, there's not a single drug development program that goes as expected. I don't know anyone, I've never met anyone that's worked on a program where everything's worked out the way it's expected. So thinking about the potential where things can go off the rail, it's very important, because it allows you to also think about, well, if that happens, what are the options I'm faced with, and how do I have everything in hand in place to then minimize the impact of that on the overall development program itself. And the indirect benefit of that is also when a company is sort of looking to acquire funding or to partner or to be acquired, then having risk mitigation strategies in place, it's a demonstration of competence of the overall company team. And that competence and having a product development plan that is solid is something that goes a long way with people who are looking to fund investments. It's not just about the quality of the molecule, it's about actually the competencies that are placed around that molecule to make sure that you deliver on its full potential. So, thinking through the what ifs, always important, not just for speed, but also for quality.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, moving on to our next part. I wanted to, determine what data and insight you need to prove your argument. And, there's a lot of helpful information And looking ahead, I was wondering what data and insight biotech companies should be using to prove their argument, and ultimately what piques investors' appetite. Biotechs are pulled in multiple directions to satisfy various stakeholders that are important to them. I feel like Patrick would be a great contributor here. And how should biotechs think about balancing these needs while still moving forward? And Patrick?
Yeah, tough question. Can be a real challenge here, Jeff. I think it's important to recognize that each stakeholder, right, has a different perspective, and one must try as best as possible to understand each perspective, and that's really critical for success. I think another important point is that the relative importance of the various stakeholders, right, will change over time. So while patients and payers ultimately, right, are very critical to ultimate success of a product in phase one, they're probably not the most important to satisfy, right? At that stage, investors and regulators will tend to dominate. So I think the most important thing is think through what input and what data needs to be generated at different points in time to satisfy each stakeholder needs, and so neglecting any of them can lead to problems down the line. So one of the things we often see is some disconnects between, for example, what investors may be looking for and what regulatory expectations might be. So it's really important to get FDA feedback so you understand, or other regulatory authorities, so you understand what their expectations are, to get that feedback early and often, and avoid building a lean, rapid program that may lead to accelerated approval that would be very attractive for investors, but may actually have very little chance of actually working when put in front of a regulatory authority.
Perfect. And this is a multi-part question for Tina. How do you make sure that you stay honest about where you are in your program? And then why is it critical to get objective eyes on your program? At what juncture, and at what juncture is this most important?
We talked a lot about data, and I agree with Patrick that what you do at different stages and who you speak to and how changes over the course of your drug development project. But it's always important to seek objective input, and there are obviously different avenues that you can seek. From a scientific point of view, using all available vetting and peer review mechanisms out there is very, very important, because the quality of the science is ultimately the quality of your product, and seeking that input and that vetting in available forums that like peer-reviewed publication, conferences, discussions with the regulator and other experts is very, very important. It's important at every stage, and it's important to remember what type of input is the most important at what stage. For example, if you're in a conversation with the regulator about a quality aspect of your product, you need to clearly get that input. It's also important to remember, especially in smaller biotechs, what competencies do you have in-house? What are you very good at? And where do you have to get outside advice, get outside eyes on your project, on your strategy, on your product? Because if your strength is in discovery and pharmacology, but you're not a quality or a CMC person, get that outside advice, get those eyes on it, make sure that you have the right tools, the right technologies, the right evaluation for your current situation, because what you need changes along the way. And I think especially for innovators who are, or that that are in a smaller company environment, they need to really do a very honest evaluation about what resources, what expertise do you have in-house versus where do you need to get advice. I think that's very, very critical. And I think that also links to how you really spend your dollars smartly, right? What do you have in-house? What do you outsource? And where at which inflection point are you?
Perfect. I think we can all appreciate that, one size does not fit all, and all programs are different. Shareholders are certainly different in their, wants and needs, but I think you guys did a great job covering the topic, but it's certainly dynamic in nature. So moving on, making every dollar count with smart and quality decisions. As we wind things down, I wanted to ask, how everybody treats Biotech's dollars and making every dollar count. This first question is to Fran, and what advice would you give companies on how to distinguish themselves on what's important from things that can be postponed or even canceled? And how do you make sure that you don't cut something out that you might regret down the road? Fran?
Yeah, that's a really, really complex question. You end up juggling a lot of needs, going back, to your target product profile, leveraging your product development plan, and then thinking also about, Patrick's point about the stakeholders, who are you trying to needs address at that point in time without sacrificing your ability to meet the needs of other stakeholders further down in development. So I think one thing is really making sure that your development plan is detailed, looking at things that are on the critical path on that development plan. That gives you an indication of things that if you postpone those, you're ultimately postponing your time to market. So those things you may want to think about doing differently, but you certainly don't want to cut out. You don't want to cut out things that are actually giving you input on whether your compound has the legs to make it based on your benchmark, which is your target product profile. So you're using all of the tools that we've sort of discussed in the last 20 minutes to really sort of balance 15 different competing priorities to find your narrow path through all of it that allows you to move forward, to focus on what's essential without sacrificing what is essential tomorrow. And the other input onto that, Patrick mentioned, use the regulators, go to them often if you've got questions that are important to how you move forward. But the other flip side of that is if they give you advice, you need to heed it. Mm-hmm. And we come across a lot of companies that I've worked with over the years who have decided not to take advice that they've been given from regulatory agencies, and then have come up against a brick wall further down in development. So, pay attention to what goes into the minutes. There's a lot of good discussions happen in regulatory advice sessions, but if they are not reflected in the minutes, then they are regarded by the agency as, I would say, exploratory scientific discussions, but not binding. So, really also tie in what is to be prioritized with the advice you're getting from regulators, and don't take that as lightly as it may have appeared.
Perfect. And next question on the topic goes to Patrick. A lot of money goes into clinical trials, and the failure rates can obviously be quite high. Are there any ways to mitigate this risk and factors that go into getting the most mileage out of that spend?
Great question, Jeff. When I think about mitigating risk or discharging risk, every program has issues and problems that one needs to address throughout the course of development. And I think Fran makes a great point of making the target product profile really your guidepost as you go through and prioritize risks of a program and prioritize which ones will add the most value as you prosecute and discharge that risk and learn about your program as you go. There are some things that need to be or would benefit from focusing on early, right? Certain aspects of a program that can influence go, no-go decisions, and other ones that maybe you can address a little bit later. They don't need to be addressed up front. And in terms of getting more mileage out of spend, a few years ago, Tufts University put out a white paper that basically concluded there were two key things that were going to save the pharma industry. So one was the use of modeling and simulation, right, which we talked about. And the other was the use of complex clinical trial designs or adaptive designs. And I think that this is in large part still true today. And I think both use cases for each of those, for modeling and for unique trial designs have expanded and evolved beyond where we might have envisioned them to be previously. So we're seeing more and more use of smarter designs, and this can result in substantial cost reductions. It used to be an adaptive design where maybe you have a futility analysis or something to drop an arm that's ineffective. We're seeing this, but we're also seeing growth in the use of synthetic control arms based on real world data, and trial conduct is also becoming more decentralized, which is really helpful in improving participation rates of patients. You make it much easier for patients to participate in trials, which also can reduce cost and timeline. We're also seeing some uptake in certain areas around what we call platform trials, right, where multiple drugs are evaluated in a single study, and that can have some benefits in terms of timelines and efficiency. So I think all of these concepts and ideas have grown significantly over the past couple of years, and in a large part probably advanced things, at least 5 years because of the pandemic. And they'll continue to offer opportunities, I think, for innovative and entrepreneurial companies to try and take advantage of in the future.
Perfect, thank you. And to go back on the previous poll question that we offered to the group on, your current top priority and the different, things where people are focusing. Let's see, making every dollar count seemed to tip the scale, and once again, it did exceed 100%. So, but ultimately, that's where people are putting their attention. Panel, anybody would like to, make some comments on these results?
I could just add to what the thought that Patrick was starting, because what he was saying about the clinical aspect is certainly true. Also, when you think about your later development and your manufacturability of your product, and in fact, in that space, not having thought through the amounts of drug product you have to have for a particular trial, or thinking ahead in terms of solving comparability issues, having the right reagents, having the right technologies to make sure that you are supporting your entire clinical program sufficiently on the manufacturing and the quality side is very, very important. And that's also one of those areas where it's actually really helpful to get advice, because seemingly small things like reagents, reference materials, things like that can trip you up along the way as you're trying to make your material or your study go further. So these things go hand in hand. And as you look at your strategy and as you think about making your program go as far as you can, I think that's an important point of consideration as you look at both the CMC and the clinical side.
Perfect, thanks. Anybody else would like to add to that?
Just, I mean, coming back to the question, it in a way it's a little bit of a trick question, because all of those three things are connected and work together. So you can't make your dollars count in the best way unless you are totally confident in the strategy and you've identified what are the key data you need to produce. So they, in a way, they are all interconnected. And doing the first two allow you to do the third one much more effectively. But understanding exactly what you spend, I mean, just coming back to clinical trials, there's a lot of data that is gathered in clinical trials that never gets leveraged in decision making. Some of it you need to do just on the off chance that it's going to give you some information on risk. But a lot of it is exploratory and you know, could be trimmed with very little effect on the main program. So, you know, definitely understanding what you need to deliver helps you trim the cost.
Perfect. You know, that's the conclusion of our presentation, but we did receive a few inbound inquiries, and feel free to make some additional questions, and we'll see if we can get to them. First question is on first-in-class products, you know, maybe more attractive to investors, we discussed earlier, but they can also be quite risky. I'll offer up to the panel if we could kind of elaborate on our thoughts around the risk that could be tied to some of these first-in-class products.
So I'm happy to start, and maybe my colleagues can jump in. I mean, I think it really comes down to risk reward, right? And one's tolerance of that. And I think it's also more nuanced in terms of, you know, what is the therapeutic modality, and what is the therapeutic area, right? We know that certain therapeutic areas have a higher probability of success than others. And, you know, for example, infectious diseases, the success rates tend to be quite high. And then if we consider small molecules, say, as opposed to success rates for a monoclonal antibody or oligonucleotide, right? All of those will depend and move the needle in the direction of what success might look like. So I don't think any of these would be considered in isolation, right? It's about the totality of the package and what the overall assessment is of that particular entity versus the market opportunity.
I would totally agree with that. I think in summary, I think it's how much uncharted territory are you in, right? In terms of what modality you are working on, how much data is there available already, how much of a path can you go down, how much predictability can you generate for yourself, even though it's a first in class, based on the type of modality, the type of manufacturing platform you might be able to use, and what is there to basically de-risk that situation while at the same time having the rewards down the road.
Perfect. We did receive another inbound question. and this is more related to, regulatory agencies. Have the regulatory agencies kept up with these specific strategies, new strategies, and more importantly, actually allowing them to be put to work, like use of synthetic control arms? Do you think that the operations like the FDA has been dynamic and have kept up to these newer and always changing strategies? Open that up to the panel as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first stab at that one. I actually think the FDA and other global regulatory agencies are both very interested in some of these newer approaches that may mean accelerated development or less treatment of patients with placebo product. They are faced with a fairly difficult task to balance these new approaches with their proven power of robustness to show that a drug is adding an effect, clinically relevant effect, and therefore justifies sort of the risk benefit assessment. With regard to synthetic control arms, the FDA has a whole guidance document dedicated to how to actually implement external control arms and where and when they consider them appropriate. Having said all of that, if you have an idea of where an external or synthetic control arm could be used, then the FDA are always open to receiving a request and a proposal around how that would be implemented in the context of the requirements for a new drug approval. And they are often willing to give you advice on where they think there are strengths and weaknesses in your proposal to help you actually move to a more innovative setting. I don't know, Patrick, if you've got something to add to that.
Yeah, no, I just I agree, Fran. I think that the FDA, the EMA have been really leading the way in terms of adapting some of these new these new development tools, and it goes beyond synthetic control arms to lots of other tools. I think the frustration is just the speed at which that happens, right? And a lot of times, could it be faster? Sure. We all wish it was faster, but it also has to be done, within the standards of what regulators are looking for, and has to be validated and robust. So sometimes that takes a while, but I think they've been great in terms of driving and advocating the use of these alternative methods that have really made changes in how development is done.
I would definitely say the same thing about the quality and the CMC space, in short.
Next question we received from the observers. As technology improves, things get more detailed. Things have evolved over the past 10 to 20 years, but yet failure rate in clinical development is still at a 90% failure rate. And why is it not reduced over the past 10 to 20 years? And what can be done to kind of improve those numbers? I'll open that up.
I think that's a really, really tough question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first started in the industry, the failure rate was still 90%, and every major tier 1 pharma had internal initiatives to reduce that failure rate. And we're still sort of 20 years later, and we've still got the same kind of figures. Having said that, I mean, the whole of the pharmaceutical area has transformed in that 20 years with new modalities. So you're trying to compare an optimization on top of a changing background to some respect, because the advent of biologics, the move to more advanced biologics, antibody drug conjugates, then on to cell therapy. I think the whole modality is evolving faster than you can actually look at the optimization around that. So I think part of it may be that we're just moving into different areas where, because they're new, come with increased risk that balances out some of the things we manage to mitigate based on evolving knowledge.
I think if you look at the reasons for failure, right, those have changed over time as well. And so, if you go back 25 years ago, the number of drugs that failed because of pharmacokinetics, right? They get into the clinic and they just weren't absorbed, and you couldn't measure it in the bloodstream. That rarely happens anymore, right? And so there's a lot of improvement in screening around bioavailability and metabolism and all of that. So a lot of those things, have been taken out of the system, but now they're failing for other reasons. But I think, as Fran said, there are areas, right, where success rates are quite a bit higher than that number would indicate.
Perfect. That comes to the conclusion of today's discussion. And I'd like to first thank Patrick, Fran, and Tina, for this lively discussion, and certainly informative. I hope everybody out there appreciated it. On behalf of NASDAQ and Satara, we want to thank everybody who joined today's event. And like I said, if you registered for the call, you'll be receiving a replay. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you.